Hello and welcome. It is Big Talk, episode number 7 with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity 10G Network. Todd, we're back. I mean, as promised, we're here week by week by week by week. We continue to do it. We continue to grit it out for our fans. That's really what we're here for. But
isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how fast the season goes once you start? I mean, you said we're in week 7. We're coming up on week 7. I mean, it feels like it takes forever to get here, and then once it starts, it flies by.
No, we're at the midway point, which is hard to believe. I mean, we're firmly in conference play already. We've had a couple of Big Ten matchups, including this past week, which we'll get to in detail. But as always, your main takeaways from week number 6 as we progress now to the halfway point.
Yeah, it was a really fun weekend. I mean, first of all, the OU Texas game, the Red River Rivalry. I still like to call it the shootout. It was a great football game, and both of those teams, had the ability to win. They're both, I think, upper echelon teams. Even though Texas came out on the short end, it was a classic game. And I think my biggest takeaway from that game is what an incredible job Brent Venables and staff have done in year 2, because they were not a competitive football team in this game last year or for most of their season. Now, granted, Dylan Gabriel got hurt last year, and the difference between him being healthy and hurt is huge for them. But Oklahoma looked like a legitimate football team and a championship caliber team in that game. So I was very impressed with that. I think my other takeaway was the number one, even though there's still great parity, and we talked about this in our game, the number 1 and the number 2 teams in the country both flexed their muscles on Saturday. They both won convincingly, in impressive fashion. And so I thought that was telling. USC continues to find a way to win, even though their defense gave up over 500 yards, and just still struggles. Alabama does not look like Alabama, championship caliber Alabama, but they found a way to win in A&M, and now they're still, I won't be surprised if they're not in the conversation, in the mix when it's all said and done. And then, I think a shout out to Jeff Brom and the job he's done at Louisville. I mean, that was not only an upset over Notre Dame, but it was an impressive the way they did it. I mean, they controlled the football game. And then, it's interesting because a couple of the top, we've been talking about these West Coast quarterbacks, right? And the Heisman hopefuls coming out of the Pac-12, and a couple of them had the week off. Bo Nix didn't play. Michael Penix Jr. didn't play. Of course, Caleb Williams was a star again. But I think it's time to also mention there are a couple other quarterbacks that are playing in on the Eastern time zone, or, in the other part of the country. Drake May continues to light it up for North Carolina. North Carolina is undefeated. They blasted Syracuse. He threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's having an incredible season. And then Jaden Daniels of LSU, even though LSU's lost some games, he has played remarkably well. He had almost 400 yards total offense and 4 total touchdowns. So those two guys have played extremely well. And then we talked about it all year. And the Heisman, unfortunately, I think now just kind of focuses on, it used to be a running back award. Now it's kind of a quarterback-centric award. But if you're talking about the best players in college football, you cannot have that conversation without talking about Brock Bowers of Georgia, who continues to shine, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who really, if he doesn't show up in a big way Saturday, Ohio State continues to struggle in that game with Maryland. And so they won going away. And Kyle McCord threw for over 300 yards, but half of his yardage went to number 18 for Ohio State.
Yeah, his high school teammate who it was reported and clearly evident that he wasn't close to 100% in that game. And yet, even if you get a 75% Marvin Harrison Jr., he's still head and shoulders better than pretty much every receiver in the country. I think he proved that once again. You nailed the pronunciation and you nailed the right out the gate. So let's just hit on the game. The Red River Rivalry, which if you continue to try to say it fast, which I've done, will completely mess you up. But you mentioned Brent Venables and the job that he's done in year 2. Oklahoma dethrones number 3 Texas 34-30 on just a fantastic, really thrilling final drive and a thrilling game overall in what is always a high-level back-and-forth affair generally in this matchup, aside from last year. And so there are a couple things that stand out. One, to your point, Oklahoma is very much in that conversation now as one of those title contenders. They skyrocket up the rankings well inside the top 10. But the second thing is with Coach Venables, if you're a program right now, I'm just going to take Purdue as an example. If you're a program with a first-year head coach that's struggling a little bit more than maybe you expected,
Yeah.
and for whatever the factors, whatever the reasons are, you can look at this situation and say, okay, you might not get the high-end talent that Oklahoma is going to get, but you can implement a system quickly. You can implement a culture quickly. And that's what I'm seeing out of Oklahoma. It's a program that was known for its offense. They're playing high-level defense, and Dylan Gabriel has been the exact remedy for all the slight mistakes maybe they made last year.
Yeah, and you say, well, how could you say they're playing great defense? They gave up 30 points to Texas. Well, first of all, Texas and Quinn Ewers, that's an explosive offense, right? And the game of football, you're not going to win many games anymore 14-10. You know, I mean, you got to be able to score to win. But they picked them off a couple times early. You know, they forced mistakes. So their defense is aggressive. They created pressures and sacks and you know, doing some things that you're used to seeing Brent Venables' defenses at Clemson do. And you mentioned it. Oklahoma's always been known for offense, but until they could really get their defense up to snuff, you couldn't really consider them a championship contender. Even the years they made the college football playoffs with guys like, you know, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murphy and Jalen Hurts, they were not capable of going forward in those games because they couldn't play defense well enough. Well, now you got a defensive guy leading the charge, and they're going to continue to play offense. Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator, is a really good coordinator and play caller. And again, Dylan Gabriel being healthy, 285 yards passing, another 113 yards rushing, and the last drive, I mean, he was unbelievable. I mean, they were literally just needed a field goal to put the game in overtime, and he said, "Nah, we're gonna go for a touchdown." And the winning touchdown pass, he hung in the pocket till the very last moment and hit his guy in the corner for the touchdown. Nick Anderson. It was a beautiful display of poise under pressure in a critical moment by Dylan Gabriel.
So another example of just the difference in terms of the defense that they're playing. 4 years ago, Oklahoma would have had to win this game 56-53.
Right.
It's
Right.
not. It's a massive difference of having to score 50 plus to win a game versus 34 to win a game in the fashion that they did. On the other side, real quick for Texas, this doesn't completely sink them, and I think that remember. You know, I know Longhorn fans. There's a lot that goes into this rivalry, and that's really where the disappointment lies more than anything. But you act like the sky is falling entirely. It's not. There's a chance to get back to the Big 12 championship, meet the same team. And if you can run the table yourself, there's no reason that Texas can't catapult themselves right back into the playoff again.
Absolutely. I mean, again, that's what I mean. These are two upper echelon teams. You know, we've talked about the parity in college football and so many teams having a chance to make it to the playoffs. Both of these teams do. Yeah. You know, the interesting thing, because the Big 12, you know, has no divisions, I mean, in all likelihood, we're going to see these two teams play again for the Big 12 championship in the last year that they're both members of the Big 12 before going to the SEC. And at that point, you know, the winner of that game has a very good shot at possibly making the college football playoff.
There was a lot of concern, especially last year with these two teams going to the SEC and whether or not they were going to be up to par, whether or not they were going to be competitive. I think they put all those concerns to rest this past week, which is good to see. Let's go from Lincoln Riley's old team to his current team, USC. You mentioned it. Another scare for the Trojans, but and I thought Matt Leinart actually tweeted out the perfect kind of synopsis for Trojan fans right now, because a lot similarly are saying, man, we barely squirt past Arizona. It takes a couple of overtimes. Should have put them away in regulation. Botched that field goal to win it. There's a lot to go through towards the end of that game, especially. They go down early and they have to come back, but they win. They win. Yeah, they're undefeated. Right. And what Leinart had said is, would you rather be a Texas fan or a Notre Dame fan coming off a tough loss this week, or would you rather just get the win and move on and just say, hey, we're still undefeated? Clearly, you take the latter. You're still top 10 in the country. You might have dropped, I think, one in the rankings, but it's all good. You're undefeated going into a big game this week. You still have your big games against the heavyweights in theory at the Pac-12 moving forward, and you still have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner under center. There's really not much more you can ask for.
Yeah, the only thing you can ask for is somewhere along the lines, maybe hopefully this weekend in South Bend, your defense
Yeah.
kind of helps you out, and helps Caleb Williams out. We talked about where would Georgia have been 2 weeks ago without Brock Bowers against Auburn? Where would Ohio State have been this past week without Marvin Harrison Jr.? Where would USC be all year without Caleb Williams, right? I mean, he has continued to play at an even higher level than last year. And I mean, he just kind of takes over the game when he has to take over the game. And, the other thing in watching this game, and I watched a good amount of it, and it was finishing after our game and, late night because it was overtime and all that, 3 overtimes. But, Jed Fish has done a really good job with Arizona. That's a competitive football team. And we've said all along that the Pac-12 top to bottom, maybe as deep of a conference and a talented of a conference as there is in college football. And Arizona probably wouldn't have been on most people's minds as part of that conversation, but they're pretty good. They were competitive in that game. They gained over 500 yards of offense, and but USC found a way to win. And again, at the end of the day, Matt Leiner's right. You got to find a way to win. You got to make improvements and hope you make some corrections and hope your defense will get better if you want to really be a championship caliber team, but we'll take the win.
Jed Fish, an outstanding offensive mind. To your point, defensively for USC, they're going up against a backup quarterback who threw for 303 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, I will say there's a reason that he did all that, and his first name is Noah, so he just a little extra superpower to him. There's something to him. I don't know.
Yeah. That's probably right.
Yeah, no, it's 100. It's actually, I know that Jim Harbaugh said that winning the scientific fact, it's actually a scientific fact. If your name's Noah, you excel. So it's good. Other notable wins, you mentioned Georgia, just dominant over Kentucky. And that was going to be an interesting litmus test game for them. Yeah. They passed it with flying colors, 51-13, the final score. And Brock Bowers passes A.J. Green, 24th receiving touchdown at Georgia. When he's done in this year, I know he, in theory, could come back if he wanted to, but there's no reason for him to do so. He'll be a top 5 pick in all likelihood the way he's played. But when he's done, he could go down as one of, if not the greatest college tight end of all time.
Well, and I think he is set kind of a new standard for the position. You know, I mean, there have been a lot of great tight ends, but the tight end position has evolved in football. Like in pro football now, the guys that you talk about are really more known for their receiving skills than they are their inline blocking skills, right? Sure. So the position is valuable at the NFL, but more so as a receiver, than a blocker. And Brock Bowers, the thing that makes him special and unique is his ability after he catches the football, his yards after catch. I mean, he has great ball skills to catch the football like a receiver, but he actually can look like a running back when he catches the football, and his ability to break tackles, make people miss. I mean, a lot of his gains, his big gains, just come on little quick screens where they get him the football right away and he does the rest. So he's really kind of changing the position. And the other thing about Georgia in that game, there are several teams that are in the running in this parity conversation that are playing with new quarterbacks this year, and Georgia's one of them. Carson Beck, back-to-back weeks now, he's thrown for over 300 yards, 28 of 35, 389, and 4 touchdowns in that game against Kentucky. So obviously Kentucky kind of came in saying, all right, we're going to stop the run. We're going to see if this quarterback can beat us, try to take care of Brock Bauer, and Carson Beck answered the bell.
Yeah, he's looked more and more comfortable, and he's recognized where his strength is because the last 2 weeks he's really targeted Bowers a whole lot more than it felt like he did even early in the season. Number 5, Florida State rolls through over Virginia Tech 39-17. You mentioned Alabama. They hang on. LSU also avoids their 3rd loss of the season. So Bama beats A&M 26-20. Jalen Milroe continues to look like he's getting just a little bit better each week, 321 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air. And then LSU and Mizzou, that was a top 25 matchup. Mizzou unbeaten on the year, coming in at 21. And the Tigers win 49-39, a pick 6 to finish the game, essentially, and seal it for LSU. That was a big one. That was an intriguing matchup, by the way, for this week going in, just to see, okay, is Missouri for real? Which even in the loss, I think they proved they are. And can LSU overcome some of the early stumbles of the season? Both things kind of happen simultaneously, but that's a big win for LSU just to kind of save their season a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I have not watched them that closely or studied them. My biggest question is what happened to their defense? I mean, we've talked about, USC's defense and the problems that they've had. But LSU's defense has been atrocious too, not just in the 2 losses this season, but even in some of their wins. Like this win against Missouri could have very easily gone against them. It was a pick 6 late that kind of ultimately did it for LSU. But before that, a lot of plays that they gave up and to this Missouri offense. And I do think Missouri is a good football team. So that, in the loss, they still take away that, hey, we can have a really successful season.
As always, no days off in the SEC, no days off, it seems like, in the ACC right now. Louisville remains undefeated in one of the biggest upsets in theory of the week. They beat number 10 Notre Dame 33-20. And we'll get a little bit more into this during the Notre Dame USC preview later in the show. But that obviously was one we were looking at very intently throughout our game and as it wrapped up afterward as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that stood out to me about that game, and looking back on it, because it was going on the same time as we were on our game, but is how Louisville won. Not just that they won, but how they won. Remember when we were getting ready for the Notre Dame-Ohio State game, we talked about this is going to be a game that's won or lost at the line of scrimmage, in the trenches, right? Running the football, defending the run. And that's what Louisville did in this game. They won the game in the trenches. They ran the football better than Notre Dame did. Outgained them by over 100 yards rushing. They got to the quarterback. They had 5 sacks, I think, of Sam Hartman. They were the better team at the line of scrimmage and running and stopping the run and pressuring the quarterback and protecting the quarterback. And so it was a thorough win by Louisville and very impressive. Again, Jeff Brom, what he's done, I think has far exceeded the expectations that even the people that brought him back to Louisville hoped for this year. And now you're sitting there with, Florida State, who everybody thinks is the best team in that conference, but you got 2 other undefeated teams in Louisville and North Carolina that are playing really good football. And then, Miami should still be undefeated, but inexplicably they're not at this point.
No, I don't know if we'll ever have a true answer as to why they didn't take a knee. Georgia Tech had no timeouts left. Miami had the ball. It was a 3rd down with 39 seconds left. You take the knee, you win the game. They decide to run it. Instead, they fumble it. Georgia Tech just miraculously 2 large chunk plays through the air that get them to the end zone essentially in 26 seconds, and they end up winning the game. We don't need to break that all down. It was just a real shock from Mario Cristobal and his entire coach.
Well, and it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable because first of all, they got so many assistants and analysts and people, with the analytics book, do this in this situation and, talking to the coach's staff and talking to the head coach. Okay, when you can take a knee to win, you take a knee to win. You don't run another play. And so because of that boneheaded decision, they deserve to lose the game. They deserve for Georgia Tech to come back and have this miraculous comeback. And there is no defense for it. There is no answer for it. It's just, it's inexcusable. That's all there is to it.
1,000%. I saw another tweet about that where someone said, in order to be officially hired as a head coach at this level, you should have to play a final minute of a video game of like NCAA or Madden to prove that you know how to handle a minute with the other team having 1 timeout left to win the game. That's it. Just show you can do it before you actually get hired. And I will say one other thing before we move on to the Big Ten stuff. Jeff Brom, I will always trust Jeff Brom to find a way to shock the nation. The reason I say that is this. There's a video of Jeff when he was still playing. I think he was in the XFL. And he takes a terrible hit to the point where he had a neck brace on the sideline. And no one thought he was playing again that season. And sure enough, the next week, he's ready to go. He's ready to play. And he gets interviewed before the game. They go, Jeff, what went into the decision of you deciding to play? And he goes, well, I'm going to answer that question with 2 questions myself. First one, is this or is this not an XFL game right now? The guy goes, yes, it is. He goes, number 2. Do I not have a pulse right now? And he goes, yep, let's play football. And he just runs. Second I saw that, guaranteed this guy's going to be successful no matter where he goes. So good. So good. All right, let's go to the Big Ten. Start with our game, number 2, Michigan and Minnesota. Little Brown Jug stays with the Wolverines, 52-10, new season high in points. New season high in points allowed as well, which is saying something, consider they only allowed 10. And one of them was on a miraculous touchdown at the end of the second quarter. So we talked about it at length throughout the game, but there's a very clear argument to be made that Michigan could and should be the number one team in the country right now.
Yeah, and really that's a moot point. It doesn't really matter if they're one or two. At the end of the day, you just want to be one of the top four and get into playoff, but they are impressive. And, we talked about their talent, the most talented team that Jim's had in his time in Ann Arbor, their depth on both sides of the ball in all three levels of their offense and defense. They've got depth and talent. They've got great culture and confidence. Their quarterback's playing at a high level. Their running game with the new offensive line transfers and Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards is starting to pick up steam. But their defense is elite. Now they've not been tested yet by some of the better offenses that they'll face in the league. And this was the same kind of thing last year. Ohio State had great defensive numbers all the way till the end. Michigan had great defensive numbers all the way till the end, and then got exposed a little bit and giving up big plays. But this Michigan defense right now is suffocating, and they have so much depth, even up front. Their defensive line is really, really good. And we made the point, they were on the field. Minnesota had run 11 offensive plays, and Michigan had already rotated in 8 defensive linemen. So, you keep guys fresh and their rep count low like that, and you get off the field, that's going to be a hard defense for anybody to work against.
Yeah, it's a defense that outscored Minnesota by themselves. Michigan had 2 pick sixes, Minnesota with 10 points. Now, the Gophers do get a bye week, which actually it should help them. One, it'll get Darius Taylor, their starting freshman running back, healthy. And then they go to Iowa, or at least they play Iowa, I should say, and that's a big game right there for them. You're going against an Iowa team, which we'll get to in a second, that has a backup quarterback for the rest of the season. The defense is as impressive. I shouldn't say as impressive as ever, because I don't know if it's as good as it was last year, but it's close. It's still
it's getting there.
Getting there. Outstanding defense. They still have high-level players all across that unit. For Minnesota, with a newer quarterback, with an inexperienced roster, the pieces are kind of in place for the future. And that's what PJ Fleck was telling us when we met with him of, hey, we want to develop, and this is a season where we believe we can win a number of games now, but as we go in the next couple of years, this is going to develop and cohesively as a group is going to kind of rise to the occasion in these next couple of seasons.
Yeah, I think so. They've got to go back to the drawing board with their passing game a little bit. They've got to be better throwing the football. They did show some signs of running the football against Michigan in the first half, not so much in the third quarter. Michigan made some good adjustments, but they didn't have the balance. Outside of that one pass right at the end of the first half, they really did not threaten Michigan with the passing game. So, I like the skill level of Ethan Kaliak-Manis, but I think they've got some receivers, but they've got to be able to step up their passing game, particularly when they play good defenses. And their next game, they're going to play another good defense. Yes. You cannot be one-dimensional against teams like Michigan or Iowa.
Yep, we'll see what that looks like. Ohio State, you talked about it. Marvin Harrison Jr. comes up big. This game was 10-10 at half. In fact, Maryland was up 10-0. Eventually, Ohio State pulls away in the fourth quarter. It's 37-17 the final. But this was a game it felt like Maryland had a lot of chances that they didn't capitalize on early. And if they had, it could have changed the complexion of the game a little bit. Ohio State, you got to give them credit. Got to give Kyle McCord credit for another stellar performance against a very good team. Improved defense. But for Maryland, I think they're going to be kicking themselves a little bit. I'm sure we'll hear about it when we meet with them this week. But they've got to be kicking themselves at least a little bit for some of those miscues in the first half.
Yeah, you're right. You're on the road. You're the underdog. You come out firing on all cylinders. Excuse me. And Ohio State is not playing their A game early. So you have a chance to really distance yourself, and really kind of put some pressure on them. And they did. And then they allowed Ohio State to kind of get right back in there. The pick six that Talia threw really was difficult, and he did not have a great game, but they were running the football. their defense was playing outstanding. So anyway, you go into halftime 10-10, and then you come out and score your first possession and take a 17-10 lead. So you're right back in front. But again, credit to Ohio State scoring 27 unanswered points. Defense, I thought, played really well, pretty much for the whole game. And in a lot of ways, Noah, this is a game where the difference between, you got two undefeated teams, Maryland wanting to take that next step in their development as a program and a contender. But at a certain point, you have two teams, one who expects to win in a game like that, and one who maybe is just hoping to win in a game like that, and ultimately Ohio State was the better team, over the course of the full 60 minutes. But Maryland, you're right, they had a chance if they really put more pressure early with a higher score and take advantage of the mistakes Ohio State was making. Now you put more and more pressure on Kyle McCord, and Ohio State did not run the football well against Maryland, and so to me that's still a concern for them. I mean, McCord's played great. Marvin Harrison was great. Cade Stover was great. Their tight end. Buka, I think, got hurt a little bit and was not at his full strength. But they're not as balanced as I know Ryan Day would want them to be right now.
No Travion Henderson in this game, which doesn't help. And there was no real explanation of why he was out. He was just ruled out before kick, and a little surprising coming off their bye week as well. So the hope is that everything is okay with Henderson and he can return sooner rather than later. Real quick, let's hit on Iowa-Purdue as well, just because the Hawkeyes, similar to what we were talking about with USC, they just keep finding ways to win. And Deacon Hill comes in. He doesn't have the most glowing game in the world, let's say, but he does throw a touchdown to Eric All again. He does keep the ball enough out of harm's way to make sure that Iowa can find the way to win. And then their defense carries them again. So 20-14, the final score here. And Iowa, despite all the turmoil and despite losing their quarterback that they were in theory relying on for this season, they're still 5-1 on the year.
Yeah. And, you talked about them like USC, but they're doing it completely the opposite, right? USC still finding ways to win their offense. Iowa's finding ways to win with their defense. I mean, in this game, they had 6 sacks, 12 tackles for loss. They picked off Hudson Card 2 times. So when we had them last week, we were saying, look, they're still playing really good defense, but they've always been known for teams that sack the quarterback and get turnovers, and that hadn't happened yet, up to that point. Well, they're starting to do that now, which makes them even more difficult to play against. So this will be a really interesting test now coming up for them going to Wisconsin. And we've been talking about this for a long time. We think that, yes, the Big Ten West is wide open. Wisconsin's the only team without a loss, but I think that game, Iowa-Wisconsin, will go a long way in determining who ends up making it to Indianapolis.
Run through some extra scores. Wisconsin, speaking of, does beat Rutgers 24-13. The Scarlet Knights still playing a little bit better, but just haven't gotten quite over the top yet. We'll see which one of these games moving, because it's coming at some point. Some of these Big Ten games are coming and are going to turn out to be wins for Rutgers at some point this season. They're just good enough to do it. Northwestern barely beats Howard, but they keep getting a couple wins here, and Ron's done an excellent job in that interim role, 23-20. And on Friday, Nebraska over Illinois, 20-7. And again, we said that we were curious what Matt Rule's first year with Nebraska would look like. He's done an excellent job in already instilling that culture that is so famous around the college world. But those are 3 more scores from the Big Ten that are all intriguing. And to your point, it all kind of leads to whether or not Wisconsin can get over the top against Iowa this week for the West.
Yeah. And for Matt Rule, it's his first Big Ten conference win. It evens their record up at 3-3. I think it was a great response for them because they were embarrassed by Michigan the week before, because one of the things that he's tried to instill in Nebraska and bring back to Nebraska is this, Nebraska football, we are physical. We're going to be the most physical team on the field. And they got knocked all over the place by Michigan 2 weeks ago. So for them to respond and come back and go on the road and get a win. And, Brett Bielema's teams are physical too. So, I mean, that's not That's not an easy place to go and win. And they were the more physical team. So it was a really good win for Nebraska. And I still think, in year one, I think they can get to a bowl game, which they have not done in 6 years.
No, they're right there. They're right there. They just have to be even the rest of the way, and they're right there, back where they want to be, and have been so thirsty for the last several years. To your point, looking ahead to Week 7 here, just some Big Ten games: Michigan and Indiana. Michigan, we talked about it on the broadcast, but their schedule doesn't really get to the point where everyone's going to be paying attention until the last 3 weeks of the season.
Yep.
They still have to go take care of business. But if they play the way they have the first now, or really the last couple of weeks, really these last 2 weeks in particular, there's no one that's going to touch them up until that final 3-week stretch. And speaking of, one of those 3 games is against Penn State, who has UMass at home this week. So another kind of easier matchup in theory for the Nittany Lions. Key opportunities both for Rutgers and for Iowa. These are some that we can quickly hit on. Michigan State goes to Rutgers. And when we talk about a winnable Big Ten game for the Scarlet Knights, this feels like it. It feels like an opportunity for Rutgers to go out there and to kind of solidify themselves as, all right, we're not at the very bottom of this conference anymore. We've taken a clear step forward. And then the other one is the one we had already mentioned, Iowa and Wisconsin, both one-loss teams in a game that could decide the West. But 2 intriguing matchups, just with overall storylines and implications for all those programs involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. I think they're both very intriguing. I think Rutgers does have a chance to take a step forward. Michigan State is a little vulnerable right now. They're not as good as they've been, and now they're coming off of a bye week, so maybe they got some things worked out, get some guys back healthy. But it is an opportunity for Rutgers at home to play well and to get a win in the Big Ten. And what their record's 4-2 right now. I mean, that would put them at 5-2, which is a great start for them. And then Iowa, it's crazy. I read somewhere, someone said, some articles, they were talking about, because everybody's talking about the drive for 325, and it's not, they're falling further and further behind. And he said, you know what? It really doesn't matter, because they're probably going to win 10 games anyway, and everybody's going to get new contracts. So, but that's how they're trending, right? They got a backup quarterback. He was 6 for 21 in the game last week, but their defense was suffocating. And now we'll see what happens with Wisconsin. And I think it'll be a tough one for them, because I think Wisconsin has a little more firepower on offense. And so they're going to have to find a way to score as well to win the game at Camp Randall on Saturday. That should be a really fun football game.
Yeah, we're locked into that one. I think we're excited to see what both teams look like, what both teams can come out with in terms of kind of the fire they're play with the urgency that's involved with that game. Talk about our games as well. Noon on Peacock, you've got Purdue at Ohio State, so you get some Buckeye action on Peacock, which is awesome. Kyle McCord and the Buckeyes just kind of seem to get more and more comfortable, and for McCord coming off the bye week to throw a career-high 320 yards through the air against a very good Maryland defense, a clearly improved Maryland defense.
Yeah.
You've got a Purdue team that's really just struggling, not just even to start this season at this point. We've talked about it almost every week on this podcast. Their non-conference schedule into their conference schedule has to be one of the most difficult in the country. I know PJ Fleck had mentioned that Minnesota's schedule was pretty equally difficult, but I would look at Purdue and say, I'm not really sure how many teams played a tougher non-conference slate than them. And they only get the 1 win out of it. They've only got 2 wins on the season. And now you have to go to Columbus and play a team that's starting to find their stride on both sides of the football.
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, I think for Ohio State, and a lot will depend on the health of Travion Henderson, but, improving their running game, getting a little bit more balance in their offense. But I'm very impressed with Ohio State's defense right now. This is Jim Knowles' second year as a defensive coordinator. Last year, they were good until they got to the end, and then they got exposed giving up big plays. They're not giving up big plays this year. That's the biggest thing. They're keeping a top on the defense. They're playing maybe a little bit more softer zone coverage and not as much just in-your-face man coverage, even though they've got the ability to do that. But the philosophy of that is to prevent or to cut down or limit those big plays, those explosive pass plays. And they've done that this year. So I'm impressed with the way they're playing defense.
No doubt. No doubt. It'll be interesting to see if they can. You expect them to dominate a team like Purdue, but at least just continue to show maybe some new wrinkles or show, as you said, a little bit more balance offensively. I think that's got to be their goal going in. 3:30 Eastern on NBC. We will be at this game, Illinois at Maryland. So a bounce back opportunity for the Terps. And that's always a difficult thing to kind of handle. And we talked about this after the Notre Dame Ohio State game, where you build it up, an emotional game where you feel like, okay, we're going to go out there, we're going to prove, hey, we belong with the big boys, we belong in terms of being talked about as a competitive team to win the Big Ten, or at least to win the Big Ten East, or be at the top of the standings. And then you have those opportunities that you can't take advantage of, the difficult end of the first half where Talia Tagovailoa doesn't recognize the clock situation. They can't get points. He throws the pick six that gets Ohio State going. And instead of being up 10-plus points, you're tied at halftime. And that feels like it shifted the game a little bit, even though they did score to open that third quarter as well. But it's a bounce-back opportunity. You can't – it's as cliche as it sounds. You can't let Ohio State beat you twice.
Right.
An Illinois team that's going to be hungry to just get back in the win column right now after a highly successful season last year.
Yeah. So, we were at Maryland a couple of weeks ago, and I'm super impressed with Mike Loxley. I think he is a really, really good football coach, a really good guy. And, I think this is a great opportunity for him as a leader of that team to, when they got back, and I'm sure they've already done this, put the film on and say, look, if we do this, if we do this, if we do this, if we do this, 4 or 5 plays, this is a completely different game. Yep. We are still capable of contending for a Big Ten championship game, but we cannot lose on these plays in critical games like this. We've got to be able to execute in those critical situations. And so, this is a team I think is a really good football team and still a lot ahead of them. They got to learn from this, and then go forward, because they'll still get the other 2 big boys in the East before this thing's all said and done, right? They failed the first test against Ohio State on the road. Nobody really expected them to win, but they were in a position where they could have tried, been in a position to win the game. All right, they didn't get it done. They'll have 2 more of those big boy opportunities, with Penn State and Michigan before it's all said and done. Okay, how do we take the next step forward, learn from this, and be a better team on Saturday?
So I feel like it deserves to at least be talked about. The chatter going into the game last week surrounding Maryland was, if you put that team in the SEC, they're ranked in the top 25 going into that game. And I think that's a fair thing to say in some ways. You had an LSU team that had lost 2, that was 23 in the country, and an undefeated Maryland team that all they had done is proven that they were very good on both sides of the ball. I know they obviously aren't ranked after what happened last week, but I'm not saying that they have to beat one of the last 2 big boys they have remaining on their schedule to get in the top 25. To me, this is a team that's worthy of being at minimum in that discussion of one of the last teams out of that top 25. And it hasn't felt like they've actually gotten that respect that they deserve to this point of the season.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's the narrative against them right now. I think they are a very good football team. And I think, how they bounce back this week will go a long way in kind of showing that to people. I would not be surprised if they find a way to get into that top 25 before it's all said and done, because there were a lot of eyeballs that saw them Saturday and saw that, hey, they had a 17-10 lead over Ohio State in Columbus. So this is not a joke of a team. Even though they didn't win, I think they probably turned a few heads with the way they played, particularly early in that ball game last week.
We'll see what Illinois can do as well, because that's now been a couple weeks in a row where they just haven't had that inspired performance that maybe they were looking for. But there's an opportunity now to go on the road against a good team in your own conference and kind of steal a win away and take advantage of a team that's maybe wounded from the week prior. And we know how good of a coach Brett Bielema is. And despite some of the failure or lack of success, let's call it, that they've had to start this year, he still knows what he's doing at a very high level on the sideline, and he can motivate a team at a high level as well, as we saw throughout the season last year.
Absolutely. And again, there's so much competitive balance in the league, particularly on the west side of the league, and that's where Illinois plays. But a good bounce back opportunity for them. And it seems like, the games where they've struggled the most this year, it's been ball security has been a big part of that, and taking care of the football and not throwing it to the wrong team and the wrong jerseys. And so they'll have to come in and execute at a high level against Maryland, because again, I think Maryland's a very good football team on both sides of the ball. So it'll be a good challenge for Illinois.
So those two start the day off, Peacock, NBC, and then it all leads to the primetime matchup, USC at Notre Dame. The rivalry is renewed. Played last year, it was USC with a victory at the very end of the season after Notre Dame had found their rhythm late. This one's on NBC, excuse me, 7:30 on NBC. College Countdown starts at 7 o'clock with Maria Taylor and Joshua Perry and Matt Castle and Mike Robinson, and then Jack Collinsworth and Jason Garrett. Zora Stevenson will have the call of the game. This is going to be fun. You know, it's a bummer that Notre Dame lost last week because you felt like going in, if Notre Dame had just the one loss, this has major implications for the playoff. Maybe not as much anymore, but certainly considering what happened with USC and how they had to limp to the finish line against Arizona, it's still an opportunity for Notre Dame to get a quality win against a top 10 opponent, against a reigning Heisman Trophy winner. It's the first time since the Bush Push game, since Matt Leinart played at Notre Dame Stadium, that there will be a reigning Heisman Trophy winner at Notre Dame Stadium. And you've got that in one of the most electric players we've seen in this sport, really in the history of the sport. Caleb Williams does things that probably we've never seen at this level. And Sam Hartman, who had not thrown an interception through the first, 5 games of the season, or actually 6 games with the week 0 game, throws actually not 1, but 3 interceptions against Louisville last week, was sacked 5 times. So I really don't need to hype this up all that much. It's Notre Dame against USC. Notre Dame's coming off a really tough loss where they felt like they should have won and played a whole lot better than they did on the road. USC's coming off a win where they felt like they could play a whole lot better. So it's 2 teams that are going to come in motivated, 2 of the most historic programs in all of college football on one of the grandest stages in all of college football.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, Notre Dame probably not in the college football playoff picture anymore, but they have a chance to knock somebody else out of that picture in one of their arch rivals in USC. But they're going to have to do, if they do pull the upset and win the game, they've got to do what they were not able to do last week against Louisville, and that's control the line of scrimmage and run the football. They only had 44 yards rushing against Louisville. That won't cut it, because in order to beat USC, you have to limit their opportunities offensively. You got to limit the amount of time that Caleb Williams gets to come on the field. And the only way to do that is to control the ball, to run the football, to mix in your play action, to not turn it over, and to control the game and the clock with your line of scrimmage. And so that's what Notre Dame has to do in this matchup and in this game is win up front, run the football, control the clock, and limit the number of opportunities that Caleb Williams and those skill guys have to play at Notre Dame.
So it feels like the Irish are going to have a legitimate opportunity to do that. When we talk about this USC defense, the one thing, and I know you've mentioned it a lot, the one thing that always stands out is the missed tackles.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a running back in Audric Estime who is going to be really upset about the performance that they put together last week. We talked to him. He's a very impressive kid, and he's big, and he's hard to take down. And he says he prides himself in not going down until at least 2 guys have tried to hit him, minimum. They've got 4 other running backs, some of which are dynamic and can get out in space, can catch the ball. So it just feels like if USC is going to win this game, they can't miss tackles. They can't miss clear, open, obvious, in theory, what would be considered simple tackles against running backs who will wear you down over the course of 4 quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to tackle better. I mean, that's the thing that they've got to answer. That's the challenge they have to answer in this game. Because Notre Dame, again, that's where they're going to try to challenge them right away. With their offensive line, with their running game. Look, we didn't get it done against Louisville. We didn't run it very well against Duke. So 2 weeks in a row, Notre Dame has not run the football as well as we saw them run against Ohio State. Yeah. So they've got to get back to that, right? They've got to get back to protecting Sam Hartman and put the onus on USC's defense to tackle and stop them. Because the advantage USC has, if you look at, okay, what do they have to do to win the game, is get their playmakers in space with the football. I mean, Notre Dame, I think they're faster on defense than they've been in years past, but that's not their strength. That's not where they're at their best. And USC has guys, if they catch the football out with green grass in front of them, it's different. It's funny because when we did that game a couple of weeks ago, I can remember Notre Dame's grass used to be long, because they didn't have fast athletes and they didn't want a team like USC coming in and running with great speed. So they kept the grass long. They probably wet it, watered it too to make it as slow as possible. That turf is fast now. I mean, it is cut down short. Notre Dame feels like they've got faster athletes, and certainly we know USC does.
Without a doubt, it all leads us to our Xfinity big connections on and off the field, and we just got to stick with the rivalry. This is a storied, historic matchup. USC and Notre Dame, one of the defining rivalries of all of college football. It actually dates all the way back to 1926. Notre Dame leads the all-time series 48, 37, and 5, despite USC winning last year. A combined 24 national titles between these two, 15 Heisman winners. They've also combined for 13 Pro Football Hall of Famers. There is a trophy at stake. We're here in, I'm still in Minneapolis, but we were at Minnesota last week, and they have, I think it's 5 trophy games.
Yeah, right.
Notre Dame, I want to say, has either 5 or 6 total. I'd have to double check that. But this one is the Jewel Shillelagh, which was the first introduced back in 1952. It's kind of like a fighting – I don't even really know how to fully describe it, a weapon of some kind. I know that in Ireland we had it. It's an Irish weapon, I believe, but it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool trophy, and we talked about it. Trophy games mean a little bit more, and then just so many historic and really vintage performances and moments in this one. The Bush Push is probably one of the most famous, but Manti Te'o had his 7th interception in a Notre Dame win that was, pushing him towards a potential Heisman runner-up that year in 2012. Notre Dame won 4 straight from 27 to 21. Then USC, if you date back before that, 8 straight from 02 to 09. The Bush Push was in 05. In 1988, it was number 1 Notre Dame against the number 2 Trojans, and the Irish win 27 to 10, the only 1-2 matchup of this series history. But a lot of history, I think, is the clear word in all of this, and the hope is that they have another storied matchup that we can put in the history books and move forward with just another a really fun back and forth affair.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't wait to just watch the opening and the beginning of this game, because I'm an old school traditionalist, right?
Yeah.
So I love these 2 helmets are 2 of the, they're most iconic helmets in all of college football. I mean, just under the lights, that gold helmet of Notre Dame and that, that, what is it, scarlet, maroon, whatever color it is, of USC with the Trojan emblem on the side. I mean, just, immediately who's playing in that game. And so I can't wait to see that when both teams are out on the field and the lights are hitting those helmets. And, speaking of uniforms, again, the other cool game in this rivalry, 1977, supposedly when the green jersey, and I don't know if they're wearing green jerseys in this one or not.
I don't think they.
Well, they only do it 1 game a year, right?
Yeah, and they did it for Ohio State. So I don't think they're going green jerseys on this one, which is a bummer, but that was really cool.
Yeah, in 1977, they came out and actually warmed up in their blue jerseys, their traditional jerseys, and then came out to start the game in the green jerseys. Joe Montana leading the way, 49-19 win over USC. So yeah, I can't wait to see the uniforms. I love the old school look and the teams that keep their traditional uniforms.
So on that, it's still also 2. You don't really get this all the time. 2 teams in uniforms that don't have names on the back of the jerseys.
Yeah,
both of them. So to your point, a little more, it feels a little bit more of a throwback feel and vibe to this game. I'm excited to watch it. I know you are as well. Any other games before we wrap up around the country that have caught your eye as we head into another week? This is week 7 of the college football season.
Well, the only other team I think we should shout out that we did not shout out yet, because there's always, they kind of always get lost in the shuffle, the quote unquote non-Power 5 teams. But one of them, whoever's the best, one of the highest ranked one is going to have a chance of playing a New Year's 6 bowl game. Wyoming with a huge win over the weekend against a very good Fresno State team that was undefeated, ranked in the top 25. They went out to Laramie, and Wyoming won the football game. So that's a team with only 1 loss. Their only loss was on the road in Austin against Texas, who we've already said is a really good football team. So shout out to Wyoming, and the Cowboys are in a good position now to maybe be that team that makes it to one of those big bowls.
I'll tell you what, Todd, I've done plenty of Mountain West basketball. I've done a little Mountain West football. conference is always good. They always have a couple teams that are legitimately good, not just within the conference, but overall within the country. And that's for both those sports, especially basketball the last couple of years. That conference has been an outstanding basketball conference that's gotten 4 teams into the NCAA tournament. Wow. That's not common for a non-power conference. And so football, it feels like the same type of deal. Now, Fresno State's been good pretty consistently now, even with Kalen DeBoer, and you get back Jeff Tedford and you see what they can do. Wyoming, really impressive win. We were watching through that score to keep checking on it. So well-deserved. We appreciate you for tuning in. This is Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity 10G Network. Make sure you download and subscribe on the NBC Sports YouTube channel and wherever you get your audio podcasts. And as always, we'll talk to you next week.